Your Majesty.
etc., etc., etc.
Very well, Your Majesty.
Good
Good
afternoon.
afternoon. Hello.
How are you?
Can you hear me?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear. Namo Mita Butsu.
Namo Mita Bits. Namo
Namo.
Mita Bits.
Hmm.
Namo.
Good to see you, my friend. Again.
Likewise.
As always. It's been a little while. Again.
Yeah, it's been a moment.
Moppo being Moppo and all that. So yeah, just getting my microphone set up here. And yeah, I've got you are you checking out the
Yeah,
background? Yeah.
I was trying to. There's sort of an Aztec thing going on. I don't know if that was intentional.
Not really. It was I did it through I the text I put in was something along the lines of the great Chakravartin, a futuristic, hyper realistic, futuristic Chakravartin king with the great jewel, and you can't see it. It's kind of cut off, but it's like
Oh,
right
right.
up there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, so it's supposed to be kind of the conceit is it's sort of a futuristic, the future Chakravartin king at some point in the distant future before Maitreya comes, something along that. Anyway, just thought it'd be appropriate for the occasion. I think we might finish the series today.
Oh,
Just
wonderful.
about. I think we're well. Maybe not, because there's some things I want to go back. Actually, no, we won't. That's right. There are some things we want to go back and revisit, isn't there? So we won't finish it today, but we'll finish the kind of overall overview today, I think, of it, and then we can start to go back. Even within this episode, there's some things I'd like to go back and revisit that I couldn't
Yeah.
find. The seven treasures, or the seven emblems of royalty of the universal or world turning monarch that I wanted to go back and revisit. I found a better description of them that's more
Right.
kind of, I think, along the Buddhist kind
Hmm.
of lines or interpretation of things. But anyways, so yeah, and I've decided this series will definitely is solidly within the Lotus Pod, looking at the universe samsarically. The Lotus Pod series. So you're joining me in the Lotus Pod, traversing time and space in Buddhist cosmology. So anyway, yeah. So but it will be a special designation under the Lotus Pod series. It'll be the Lotus Pod episode whatever, and then Project Chakravartin, and then kind of whatever topic we covered in that particular episode. Anyway, so yeah, so speaking of which, why don't we get to it? We are just about finished. Am I too loud, by the way? Is this too close to my
It's a smidge loud.
tad too close? Okay. I think I'll put it off to the side, perhaps.
Oh, that's already better. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, just put it off to the side a bit, and then it won't be quite as pronounced, and that way I can get at the keyboard and everything easier with it off to the side. So right there, let me share my screen, and then we can go from there. So we were kind of on this last bit here at the end of the last episode. I went back and reviewed our work and the last episode we did. So we just had gone into this, but we just kind of read this section, and part of this one I didn't get quite through the second, so perhaps we could start here again, just kind of read these again,
Mhm.
and then kind of uh, you know, I'm going to move this over here, uh, and then kind of maybe discuss this bit because I think there's some good points in here that or things in here we could kind of flesh out a bit in our discussion. So, and this is of course from the great Encyclopedia of Buddhism, the Chakravartin topic.
And if I can plug it, this is one of the only, non-Wikipedia wikis that's worth anything.
Yes, yeah, yeah,
There are a million of them, but
yeah.
this is a good one.
Yeah, it's really good, and it has really good. It does good referencing, and it doesn't have the biases perhaps that other uh or inaccuracies as that other wikis might have. But anyways, and particularly the referencing, it references just about everything that it is notating, so which is really good. So agreed. Props to the wiki the wiki volunteers for this or staff or whatever it is for this wiki. So yeah, so this is from here, and obviously we're reading all this as for educational purposes. So fair use and all of that. So copyright is always the copyright owners, etc., 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 etc. As a certain king said in a certain movie. It was the king of Siam. It was at the time, right? What was that? The King and I,
Yeah,
the King and
yeah,
I,
yeah,
the
yeah.
musical. That's right, the musical King and I, etc., etc., etc. Anyway, so, secular versus spiritual domains. According to traditional Buddhist sources, when Gautama Buddha was born, sages predicted that he was destined to become either a universal monarch, Chakravartin, or a universal spiritual guide, a Buddha. In choosing to renounce worldly life, the Buddha chose the latter, the later path, or the latter. It should be latter path, I think. But anyway, yeah. So I mean, that's a good right there is a good thing for kind of highlighting that um the birth of these great the beings that are born in human form with the 32 marks and 80 minor marks of great humans, um, great men, are in the vernacular. Uh, but the they have that potential. It seems like to go either way, and that's what this is why that they noticed that they noticed the marks and they said either it'll be either this or that. So I just think that's an interesting thing to point out that you know a Chakravartin. I wonder whether you know they there's a similar thing at their birth. It's just one of those things I wondered whether there's a sage or a soothsayer or a court wise man whatever the court is, and they see the birth and you know say something similar. Either they'll be a great, you know, universal monarch or a universal spiritual guide. Either they'll be turning the wheel of the world or turning the wheel of the Dharma. I wonder whether that happens or whether they can recognize that in a Chakravartin that though they have the 32 marks and 80 minor marks, that it's not quite the same quality as a Nirmanakaya, as a spiritual teacher would have. Anyway,
So I have a thought on that, which might get me in some trouble with some people, but I'll risk idiosyncratic takes.
on this channel, we don't, we don't shy away from topics. We don't shy away from any question. We don't shy away from any reasonable
Mm.
controversy or reasonable contentiousness. Anyway, even though
So,
there's no debates, we don't debate anyway.
bear with me here, and you'll see why this might be a little controversial. So, there's differences between the Hindu and Buddhist accounts of caste, right? Like the Buddha has his own narrative, which differs from the Hindu narrative. But um, Shakyamuni did like inhabit a society was ordered along the Hindu principles of caste. And according to those principles, there's this kind of proximity between the top two castes, between the priestly caste and the warrior caste.
Ah,
And
interesting.
according to the Hindu narrative, in kind of like the most primordial times,
Yeah.
those two were, or there's conflicting narratives within Hinduism, but there is a narrative where the warrior character and the priest character were kind of fused into one, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
when
Sorry,
you
I've got
no,
numerous distractions coming in here in Mappo. Phone ringing. I hadn't turned my ringer off. The washing machine was making all kinds of noise. I had to close the door. Sorry about it. Please
not to
continue with
worry.
your last sentence. Pick up with your last sentence again and continue. I do apologize.
Yes, no, no, not
Unscripted,
at all.
unrehearsed, teleprompter free at the Junkai channel, as always. Sorry.
So in certain Hindu narratives, there is like kind of in the most primordial times a point where the warrior figure and the priest figure are fused into a single kind of, you have your priest king.
Yeah.
And you see kind of an intimation of that or a parallel to that in this idea that the most grand person has this sort of potentiality of supreme
Mm,
priestly figure
mm,
and supreme
mm,
royal figure. And
mm.
they what they ultimately do is they renounce. I mean, that's part of the sort of the cyclical story of a Buddha. They renounce the lower of those two, the priestly, the kingly path for the sort of supreme priestly
Yes.
path.
Yeah.
But I think that's sort of just consonant with what you were saying about
Yeah.
this, the two
Definitely.
natures.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very, very good. Very good insight. And I think, given the context of, you know, where Shakyamuni chose to appear in Nirmanakaya form in South Asia, I think that's, amongst, Hindu culture, I think that's a fair point to kind of draw out here, but
Well, that's a
yeah,
very good point. It's actually something I had thought about because he could have chosen to be born anywhere, but he chose to be born in that
yeah,
society. It has to be significant.
exactly.
Yeah.
Which is interesting within that because there's that, there's, though there are vast differences, there are vast similarities
Mm, mm,
between
mm.
different Hindu paths, um, and Buddhism, particularly some Hindu paths are have very striking similarities with with Buddhism. But I always look at Hinduism, and that's it might be one of those points of contention, slightly controversial points I'm going to make here, but um, that I kind of see Hinduism as at some point, um, an earlier point, you know, as it's told in the sutras and in Buddhist cosmology, all these previous past Buddhas, and that at some point Buddhism was extant, in some form in our world, and I kind of see Hinduism as a kind of drifted away from that, as a kind of divergence from whatever that previous form
Mm.
of
Like a
Buddhism
remnant.
and Buddhist
Yeah.
may have been. So it almost, so in that, I've always looked at it that way. And then when I think about Shakyamuni coming within that, his, becoming in Nirmanakaya form into that culture, it makes even more sense that, you know, and that is, I mean, I think other Buddhas prior to Shakyamuni, of the Buddhas of our world, however you want to kind of look at that. I look at that in a broad sense, as we discussed in one of our recent discussions. but they too, I don't know of all of them, but some of them were also born in something resembling
Hmm.
the Indian subcontinent in South Asia, in similar places and things. So not exactly the same. So you know, but it just makes sense to me that that's happening. That you know, it's even some Hindu sects kind of see Shakyamuni as the corrector of the teaching. They
Well, yeah,
see him
I was just going to say
as an
that. Yeah,
avatar
yeah.
of Vishnu, as a corrector, as a restorer of the true teaching, even within the Hindu context.
And
So,
interestingly, relating to one of our previous conversations, one for those Hindus who do see Shakyamuni that way, one of the aspects that's important for them is his teaching against eating meat or animal sacrifice. I mean, just in general, having greater reverence for animal life. They see the sort
yeah,
of animal sacrifice and the consumption of meat that prior to that is a deviation from primordial Hinduism, which his function was to correct, which is just sort of interesting parallel. Although, I mean, sort of closer to our topic today, just one more thing on the sort of
yeah,
the Hindu similarities. And again, this is another thing that might get me in hot water with certain people and understand why a lot of actually hidden Buddhists in India don't like this. But like there were and still are Buddhist societies with like a caste structure. Like they can't like Buddhism did not abolish caste and it brought caste to other places. Like Sri Lankan Buddhists have caste, Newar Buddhists
yep,
in Nepal have caste. There's even like bits of the caste system in Thailand. Like there's still Brahmins in Thailand. And even in like East Asia, you can see sort of parallels to the caste system
hmm
with sort of functions certain people had. And that's a whole different conversation, but there's some very interesting writing about that, which I think gets
definitely.
kind of swept under the carpet with this whole,
hmm hmm
the emancipation of the untouchables thing, and it's not quite as simple as some of those people
No,
like to make.
exactly. I've always
Yeah,
thought that. Yeah, I've always thought that it's not quite as straightforward as the politically correct version
yeah,
of
exactly.
Buddhism wants to be scrubbed and cleaned of all these, these things. Yeah. So and you can see the influence. Actually, the influence goes both ways of Hinduism on Buddhist cultures and vice versa. And you see that what you were just referring to in East Asian cultures, you can see the that South Asian influence through the shared cosmology, it definitely influencing the cultures.
And also, certain deities. I mean, you find there's
Yeah,
shrines
that's what I mean.
to Ganesh in Japan.
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly. Yeah,
you'll find shrines to Brahma all over Thailand and like, in a lot
yep,
of China too. So
yep,
it's actually sorry, I know we're going off a tangent. I swear, it's the last thing. One thing I
yep.
always thought was interesting is that Brahma is more worshipped by Buddhists than he is by Hindus. So in Hinduism, you have the three
Interesting.
supreme
Yeah.
gods, right? Like Brahma, Shiva, and what's the other
hmm
one? And for
Vishnu.
whatever
Yeah.
reason, sort of worship is almost entirely focused on
Mm.
Vishnu and Shiva, whereas Brahma seems to be more of an object of worship in Buddhism. I assume that's because he's the one who asked Shakyamuni to share the teaching, and that sort of explains why he
Yes,
has it.
could be.
But yeah,
I
but
think
it
there's
is.
another reason, another potential reason. Now
Hmm.
that we're discussing this, is that um, Brahma is kind of associated almost with the sort of supreme
Hmm.
um, consciousness, the indifferent, undefinable. Do you know what I mean? I think there's some degree of association with that. So the different Hindu sects um, tended to revere or worship or make the focus of their paths or their sects or their religions the more the ones that have more defined personalities, if you see what I mean, like Vishnu or Shiva or even which is kind of with Krishna being an avatar of, there's almost more focus on Krishna than Vishnu, even though it is Vishnu in their belief system, it is Vishnu, in their cosmology, it is Vishnu, but because it has more, so I think, and that's one of the reasons I say that is it gives them, it's something more relatable, it's something more graspable, kind of like our Shin Buddhism, our tradition, the Sambhogakaya manifestation of Amida Buddha is is something tangible that we can kind of get our head round and grasp, and it's a different, there's a different, there's obviously differences in the cosmology and differences in the and the whole teachings and everything, but I'm just saying so in a similar way, I think that's why Brahma isn't as, because I think Brahma's associated with that, with kind of the ultimate in and it's not something as relatable as these other deities, or Ganesh or Shiva or Vishnu or Krishna, or that sort of, or even Kali, it's there's so that might be a little reason, a cute clue to that. But anyway, so yeah, wow, that was quite a that was quite a full tangential sphere of things that we've discussed from this one point. Was there anything else you wanted to say? There was something else that occurred to me too,
Yeah.
but now I can't. I didn't want to interrupt the flow of our discussion. Maybe I'll come back later. Anyway, shall we go to the next
Yes.
next bit here? Did you want to read?
Yeah.
Peter Harvey. Yeah.
Peter Harvey states the paralleling of a Chakravartin and a Buddha is also made in relation to other events of Gautama's life and indicates the idea of a Buddha having universal spiritual sovereignty, i.e., influence. It's not what sovereignty means, but anyway, over humans and gods. It also indicates that Gautama renounced the option of political power in becoming a Buddha. He certainly had no political pretensions, as Muhammad had, and was not seen as a political threat by the rulers of his day, as was Jesus. He did, however, teach kings and give teachings on how best to govern a realm. So, which is interesting. I mean, unless you have something to say about that, I just want to.
I was just going to quickly. I do have.
Yeah.
I was just going to quickly see who this was. Just quickly, emeritus professor of Buddhist studies at the University of Sunderland. He gained a and just get an idea. And this is from Harvey 2013. I don't know what that book is, but anyways, so or unless he just said it in a speech, maybe it was one of his lectures or something, but anyway, so I was just going to say the distinction here, is obviously the Buddha, the Buddha of a time and place is Nirmanakaya Buddha. The world is the turner of the Dharma, the wheel of the Dharma. So has the spiritual, his domain is spiritual, and also his domain is in that sense is includes the gods and humans. I would say all worlds, really, but mainly, obviously, he's appeared in human form. So, but his domain is over humans and gods, whereas the Chakravartin is only over humans. His domain is only over the human realm, and wouldn't and would be, if anything, would be in some sense probably subservient to the god realms, if you see what I mean, in some way. But yeah, so that was just something.
No, I think that's very very true, very good. I just wanted to comment on this comparison to the Prophet Muhammad and to Jesus, which I mean, so relating to what we were saying earlier, like in terms of his functions, like what Muhammad does in Islam is he's the supreme like we're sort of talking about the sort of parallel in Hinduism, he's the supreme priestly and kingly figure in one person.
Mm.
Whereas like I think Jesus is probably a closer parallel to the Buddha in that he's like there is kingly symbolism around him and sort of a kingly aspect, but he really is principally a priestly figure.
Mm.
And
Mhm.
being seen as a political threat, that might be more down to the Romans than
Yeah,
something Christianity itself.
yeah.
Um, but it is
Well,
interesting
that's a
that
whole nother discussion, the complexities of both of these, the
yeah.
complexities, the situations and contexts of both of the, these other religious figures. But yeah, anyway, yeah, go ahead.
But but that there is a little bit of sort of there's kind of an archetype for some kind of activism in Shakyamuni because there's the incident of him so getting in the way of war elephants, right? I mean, I'm not going to be able to recall the story very well, but sitting down and kind of almost like an archetype of Gandhian type
Mm.
resistance, exercising some kind of political role, but purely through his moral authority. Um, and I just think that's interesting and
Mm.
worthy of when it says here that he had no political pretensions. I mean, it's not
Yeah,
entirely
I wanted to
true.
come back to yeah, that there was no, that people, I'm not sure that's true, that he was not seen as a potential threat in some ways, and because the implications of his teachings would, certainly be different than, a different interpretation of things than would the rulers of his place and time. In putting it back in the context of South Asia, I think, um, yeah, I'm not sure that's completely true that he was not seen as a. I mean, what's your knowledge and
Yeah, I
thought
mean,
on that?
like I don't think in these traditional societies, this whole kind of separation of the religious and political spheres that just wasn't there, and that's sort of a
Mm, mm,
projecting back what we
hmm
have now.
hmm
So I think there's a problem. I mean, like even the Romans are supposed to be the most secular of ancient societies, and even there, you look at them, and they're actually a lot of religion going on there, and how they understood the function of the emperor and like what he was ontologically. So yeah, I don't really think that's true. And like I said, he did play some part in political events, like trying to prevent wars. But also, he was paid homage to by kings, and that's kind of inherently political. I mean,
Exactly. Yeah.
like
Exactly.
yeah, and now I'm so bad with names. What was the the king in the Contemplation Sutra? How am I completely blanking on this? Who was
Uh.
and left the
Oh.
star?
Yeah. King.
Bimbisara.
Sorry. But yeah. There we go. Bimbisara. Thank you. Yeah. Well done. Oh.
Um, yeah, no, yeah, no, it was like, just out there. But yeah, so I mean, he was, that's sort of inherently political, isn't it? Or it inherently has some kind of relationship to politics, and if someone doesn't like that, they'd see that as a threat. I mean, certainly, his son didn't like it, or at least not initially. So yeah, I'm not sure about this. I don't think this is totally accurate. I mean, it's
Yeah.
true that he had a different function from the Prophet Muhammad, but like maybe it's not quite as different from those other two figures it's trying to make out. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I mean, they have completely different contexts and situations
so
and
yeah.
completely very different teaching. Both of those figures are their teaching and understanding and, you know, um, cosmology is
Mm,
vastly different from what the Buddha taught, and the approach of the Buddha, their approach would have been vastly different. So very, I'm always a bit, you know, I don't know, a little bit skeptical or wondering when anyone's making any comparisons of any other religious figures to Gautama Buddha.
mm,
Like, I just, because it's so different. Buddhism is so different from any other, even though we've been pointing out similarities with Hinduism, it's still vastly different, you know. And I just, I don't know. It makes me a little bit, I don't know, uncomfortable is not the word, but just, yeah, you're looking at them as equals, and I don't. I don't see other religious figures as equals to, you know what I mean, or congruent really at all with the Buddha and his approach. But then we would. That's how I would see it because I'm a Buddhist. So, but and also, you know, though one other point I want to make here is that, even though obviously, as it says here about him teaching kings and giving teachings on the best way to govern, which is going to be eventually in this series going to be part of, what we talk about. And obviously did give, he gave, there's social implications of his teaching, and he did give social teachings, and do you know what I mean? And aside from all the stuff that we don't even, it's estimated that we don't even have half of the texts that once existed in Buddhism, and recordings of like his conversations with people and things like that we don't even know. Do you know what I mean? So what I want to say is that there's this tendency in modern Buddhism and modern Buddhist discourse to kind of, and in the popular perception of Buddhism, that it's this apolitical and you know very politically correct and not involve, just doesn't involve itself with which I can see where that has come from to some extent, but it's just not true. It's this but at the same time, with those aspects where the Buddhist teaching did touch on political matters, rulership matters, governance matters, social matters, it's by far the most healthy, least harmful, most wise teachings along those lines, if you see what I mean. And in my humble opinion, that is, and in how that has, where there've been political things happening in Buddhist movements and schools, right up through, throughout history, right up to modern day, compared to other religions, it's been far less harmful. The things that are problematic about other religions when it comes to politics and society and things like that, I compared to much more harmfulness I see baked into those religions than the Buddhist ways when it comes to these things. Do you see what I mean? Does that make sense? So on one hand, I want to say, I want to get away from this whitewashed, this sterilized version of Buddhism as not being, political and neutral and just not a political threat. And but at the same time, see how it's the most healthy of those things. Of all the religions, I see it as the most, and it's been the least harmful in the world. Even where Buddhists have gone a bit wild and done maybe not helpful or harmful things, compared to the net comparison of the harm done by other, because of other teachings of other religions, is like minuscule by comparison. Do you see what I'm saying? I've always wanted to make this point or have this discussion in an episode, but anyway, I think that I've completed my thought there. And I think we're at 5 minutes. So good.
5 minutes. So should we
Yes.
finish the section at least?
Yeah.
Want me to read it or?
Yeah. Did you want to comment on anything I just said
No,
there,
no,
or yeah,
I'm good.
or okay, cool.
Yeah. So,
you, yeah, you don't want to join in that my potential controversy there. I don't blame you. Anyway, yeah, go ahead.
Smith and Novak state Buddhist societies distinguish between two world-moving wheels, the wheel of political power, and I'm going to butcher this, Anachakra, and the wheel of moral spiritual power, Dharma Chakra. The Buddha's followers honored him with the title Chakravartin because he turned the latter wheel, setting it rolling over the earth for the awakening and benefit of all beings. The similar double meaning of Messiah plays a role in the story of Jesus. Yeah, I mean, it's he's given the well, that's the thing. There's again, this is touching on this political function in the Buddha because he subsumes within himself this element of the royal function. It's subordinated to a priestly function, but it's still in there. Right? I mean, he's still the
Yeah.
And I think what they're referring to when they refer to Jesus is that title of Jesus is King of Kings, that he has sort of sovereignty over
Yeah.
political figures as well. I mean, it reminds me, I was talking about this just yesterday with a friend, but there's this very early Chinese Buddhist text which is called, why monks do not bow to kings, or why monks should not bow to kings, or something to that effect. Yeah.
Yeah. No, yeah. That does tend to be the pattern. I think we've discussed this in another video, of the generally speaking, the secular power, probably for most of our known history, would be subservient to is supposed to kind of be subservient or under the aegis of the spiritual powers, that be. And where that's been flipped, there have been some quite egregious things that occurred. But at the same time, where the spiritual or religious power has too much power and isn't checked, that has been not very good as well. So anyway, I did remember the point I was going to make. This is kind of reminded me, you when you were saying about in Hindu culture and the caste system, and that there's the fine line between the Brahmin and the warrior kind of caste. It made me think of other cultures, when we're discussing all this, and this as well, that the Buddha has within them kind of that leadership quality, but it's focused on the Dharma, but it still has that influence. Other cultures, this is what I wanted to say earlier when we were discussing this. Other cultures have a similar thing. There's, with the Greeks, there's the idealized, philosopher king, of Plato, or, in the Arthurian, I've talked about, my interest in the Arthurian cycle and Arthurian legend, and how, the king, the similarities of the either the stone or the horn or the sword coming and appearing before and pointing out who the next king is, similar to the Chakravartin and the wheel appearing and declaring but anyway, the king in that Arthurian cycle is even though he's a secular temporal authority, he is still, it's a very spiritual. The whole of Arthurian legend is very spiritual, and there's a spiritual connection of the king with the knights, with the land, with the religion, whether it was the, in the pagan cycle or in the Christian, it's very there's a strong spiritual element. So again, there's similarities of these things in other cultures. So, well, at least we got through this section. We still have the etymology to cover. We could probably make a whole discussion of that for the next episode.
But no matter what I think, I must go living life. As leader of my kingdom, I must go forth. Be father to my children and husband to each wife, etc., etc., and so forth.